And welcome back, everyone. Today I played in the 13th and penultimate round of the FIDE Candidates tournament being held here in Madrid. Now, after what happened in the previous round with my draw against Jan Nepomniachtchi and Dinglaran losing, I was tied for second place. So today I play my final white game against Jan-Krzysztof Duda. So without further ado, let's jump right into the game. So the game starts with e4, c5 is played. I play knight to f3, and Duda plays d6. Now, I was a little bit surprised. I figured after rest day with Duda doing so poorly in the tournament, it was much more likely that he would probably play his favorite Petrov defense, like Jan Nepomniachtchi has been playing, but he decided to play the Najdorf instead, being very principled. So I play d4, takes, knight f6, knight 3, a6, all standard, bishop e3, e5, and now I play knight f3 once again, just like I did earlier in the tournament against Alireza Firouzja. So now Duda plays bishop e7, Alireza played knight c6 against me, and now I play h3 here. Now this was a move that was recommended in one of the Anish Giri courses on Chessable, so it's something that I thought, why not try and be like Anish? So I play h3, h6, now I go bishop c4 here, we get bishop to e6, bishop b3, and now knight c6. And already I was a little bit confused here, because normally black plays with queen c7 and bishop e6, and not bishop e6 and knight c6. But now I decided that after a bit of a think, I would play knight h4, which is a little bit of an unusual move. Now, the reason I did this is sort of twofold. First of all, black has pushed the pawn to h6. So because the pawn is no longer on h7, their idea is where the knight can go to g6 after exchanging the bishops. Whereas if we get a position like this, for example, just to illustrate the point, let's say knight 6, bishop c4, bishop e6, bishop b3. Without the pawn on h6, for example, knight h4 has no bite to it. Of course, black has a move like knight e4, but even beyond that, if we get some position like this, there are no squares for the knight, and the knight on the rim is very dim. So therefore, in this position, I play knight h4. Now we get knight a5 here. And now I played bishop takes e6, pawn takes, and knight g6. Now, what I was trying to remember in my mind was a variation that I played many, many moons ago when I was a lot younger. There's a variation in the Najdorf that I recall seeing where it was something like this. Actually, sorry, it was something like this, and then I think you can trade and go knight h4. Now, I don't remember exactly how it went, because in this position, of course, after king f7 and g5, black is fine, but there was some variation that I vaguely recalled, so I thought that I had to be on the right track with what I did here with knight h4, knight a5 is played, which really surprised me, by the way, because after takes, knight g6, rook g8, I thought in my mind, based on very, very old games, just this vague recollection with the knight on g6, white has to be better. Now, here I played a move that I'm not sure if it's the best move. In retrospect, I wish I had done something a little bit differently. I decided to play the logical castles. Now, the moves that I was considering here were castles, pawn to h4, and f4. Now, I wanted to go f4, but oddly enough, after knight c4, I saw this move queen f3, which the computer likes, but I thought that after a move like knight takes b2, I wasn't sure why I should be better here. Computer apparently says after castles, knight c4, rook b1, queen c7, the quiet move king h1 or f5 gives white an advantage potentially. Again, it's very speculative, and without actual preparation, I wasn't really sure if this was a good try, so I thought that after a deep tank, I might as well play like a human. So I castle, Duda plays knight c4, which really surprised me. I expected king f7 here. And after king f7 takes, I thought that queen e2 followed by f4 followed by rook d1. White should be better because the king is kind of a little bit iffy here in the center of the board. So instead we get knight c4 here. Now I play bishop to c1, and Duda again surprised me by playing rook c8. I was sure that he would go king f7 here, surely, but in this case, once again, after takes, b3, knight b6, and f4, I think white is doing very, very well. You can put the bishop on the long diagonal, the rook on the f-file is doing well. There's queen d3, rook d1. A very free-flowing play for white, and I think white has a clear-cut plan, and white should be clearly better here. But Duda plays rook c8. Now I was really confused because I'd been expecting this king f7 move for the last three moves. But now, after a bit of a think, I play this move h4. Now, as I said, h4 was a move that I considered before castling, but I thought it was too much. But here, it makes a lot of sense because now when black goes king f7, I go h5. This knight is always targeting this bishop on e7. It's furthermore reinforced on g6 by the pawn, so we have this great outpost, or the bastion, as XQC would say. And I just thought this knight is really, really good here. So h4 is very thematic. Now here, rook c6 was played, and now I played queen f3. And again, the main thing I was thinking about was h5, and then somehow how to develop the rook and the bishop. If I can ever get any sort of development, like something like this, for example, followed by rook d1 and rook e1, white is much, much better. So really, it's very conceptual. First things first, I want to lock the pony, potentially on h5, and then I want to figure out how to develop the bishop and the rook here on the queen side. So I go queen f3. Now, in retrospect, I didn't really love this move. I felt that it was actually maybe a mistake that prevents me from ever being able to push f4 and open up the f-file. But during the game, I didn't see a better square. I thought queen e2 was possible too, but after king f7, h5, somehow here, I thought that black could go rook e8 or maybe even b5, b4, and it didn't feel quite right to me somehow. That being said, it's probably a better try. So I go queen f3, king f7 is played. Now I play h5 here, locking the knight on g6, queen c7, play knight d1. Now, I don't know if knight d1 was the best move. Again, it's a move that in retrospect I was regretting. The computer apparently prefers something like knight e2, and after rook e8, something like b3 and c4, or potentially something like after knight b6, something like c3, knight d7, and then maybe queen h3 followed by f4. Again, once you see how the game transpires, these ideas with f4 make a lot more sense with knight on e2 jumping to f4. But during the game, I didn't quite realize that this move knight d1 was not best. I just simply wanted to play this. And again, very simple idea, b3, c4, develop the bishop, bring the rook to the center. And it's very free-flowing. But here Duda finds a great idea with knight b6, knight e3, and now he plays knight b to d7. Now, the reason I say this is a great idea is because the point is black is going to go knight f8 to try and trade off this knight on g6, and I completely overlooked this concept. So now I played c4 after a bit of a think. Probably in retrospect, maybe there was something better that I could have done, but I don't really know. I guess computer likes knight g4, knight f8, knight e7, king e7. Wait, actually, sorry, knight g4, I saw this, knight f8, knight e7. And apparently after takes bishop h6, white is just much better here, which is kind of perplexing to me because I did consider knight g4 during the game. I think actually during the game after knight g4, I was worried about rook c2. Apparently after takes, king e8, takes, this move h6 is very strong for white. Again, from a distance, very hard to see because after knight f6, it feels like black is kind of stopping the pawn, but perhaps this would have been the way to proceed. Instead, I played c4. Duda goes knight f8, logical move. I play knight h4. Now he plays knight h7. Worth consideration was also g5 here, forcing the exchange of pieces on g6. But after b3, I thought with this great sort of Maroczy bind setup in the center, followed by the fianchetto and bringing the rook to the center, I thought white should be better. Computer apparently thinks black is okay, but I would have been very happy with this. So Duda plays knight h7, which I was expecting. Now I go b3. Knight g5, now I play queen to e2, he takes a pawn, and I go bishop b2. Now you're probably wondering, why did I give up this pawn? Now, when I played c4 all the way back here, I basically was intending to sacrifice the pawn on e4 because I saw nothing better. And I thought that I was trying, or actually the way I was trying to think here was like a computer. I thought that with my development, bringing the rooks to the center, still having this great outpost for the knight on g6, and black being unable to remove it right away because the knights are in the center of the board, I thought that it was worth more than the pawn here. Now, as it turns out, it actually is not. So rook e8 is played. I go knight g6, putting the knight back on the outpost. King g8, and now I played rook d1. And now after a5, I was very confused because I thought that I have to be better here, even though I'm down the pawn because I've got a great outpost. The pawns are very brittle here in the center, potentially. Maybe f4 is a line too, but I just couldn't figure it out. So after a bit of a think, I played knight g4. And now bishop d8 was played by Duda. I take on f6, he takes back. Worth noting, by the way, black cannot trade because after takes, knight f6 is not a move because e6 hangs. And after knight g5, I get f4 takes and rook f4. With the stack on the f-file and this very dangerous knight on g6, I think white should be better. So Duda plays bishop d8. So now I trade on f6 here. And now I play rook d2, which is a big mistake. Now, initially, I wanted to play rook d3, and I was going to play this, but then I got scared of b5. Now, I should have played this anyway, because after b5, I can still go rook d1 here. And now the rooks on d3 and d1 are very well stacked, because I have ideas like bishop a3, c5, and black has to do something with the pawn. If black goes b4 here, now I can go c5. If he takes with the pawn, of course, he loses the pawn on e5. And if he takes with the rook, he loses the pawn on d6. And if he pushes d5, of course, he just loses the pawn on e5. So sorry, I should say you take with the bishop, of course, because you probably are seeing the bar at home, wondering why is the bar shifting so much. So the reason that the reason that rook d3 is better than rook d2 is because what happens in the game is now after knight d7, I play this horrible move rook d1, trying to follow through on the same plan. But I kind of had to change the plan here and just go f4 and knight f4 and just play the position. Because when I go rook d1, now after bishop g5, rook d3, b5, there's a big difference. Black is the knight on d7 and the bishop on g5, whereas in the other variation, when we get to this position, let's go here, the knight and the bishop are on f6 and d8. So in the game here, Black is much more active with this knight and this bishop, and now c5 is never a threat because he just eats it with the knight and the pawn is still guarded. So I lose the c5 threat. I can't take on b5 because rook c2 wins material, and now I'm in a world of hurt. So at this point, I was very, very upset at myself because I thought, well, if I was going to stack the rooks on the d file, then why didn't I just put the rook on d3 to begin with? So now I was very unhappy, and now I played bishop a3 after a bit of a think, fully resigning myself to the fact that after b4, bishop b2, knight c5, I'm definitely in some trouble here. Now, I wouldn't say that it's losing, but I'm going to have to struggle to make a draw here. Having said that, Duda here started thinking. Now, in a blitz game, he would have played b4 in probably 5 seconds, and the show goes on. But as Duda started thinking more and more, I began to realize that he was probably not going to play b4 because this is the obvious move, and he was trying to make this move d5 work. So I actually got it from the board at this moment, and while he was thinking, I was thinking, okay, after d5, of course I take rook c2. Now, the idea is that if I ever move my queen to, say, e1 or f1, black goes b4, and the bishop is actually trapped here on a3 because there are no squares available. So as I got it from the board, I was thinking about this while he was thinking. I thought, well, of course I have bishop d6, and I can't really be in danger because after, say, queen c8, I can just move the queen, and the bishop's no longer getting trapped on a3. So much to my shock, I actually came back to the board, and Duda did in fact play d5, and now I was very optimistic. I felt like Lady Luck, or I think that's what it is, Lady Luck or Fortune, whatever you want to call it, was actually smiling on me at this point, and I finally got a bit of a break in this tournament and a mistake from my opponent, because now I took, rook c2 is played, and after about a minute think, I just played bishop d6. Now, there are other moves here, and I had 20 minutes for about 5 moves, but I thought, you know what, I know bishop d6 is going to avoid any danger, I can't lose. Just play it. Don't waste like 10 to 15 minutes looking at other lines, because then you're probably going to have to play bishop d6 anyway. So I just did it. And now after about 10 seconds, when Duda came back to the board, I saw him visibly upset. He started shaking his head, and I knew that he was going to have a very, very difficult time coming back mentally to where he found the best moves, because just like that, the advantage is gone for black, and black actually has to be very careful not to end up much worse. So Duda takes the queen. If he had played queen c8 here, I can just go, I think probably what I would have played is queen f3 here. And the problem is now the knight is really good. The d file is opening up for the stacked rooks, and the pawn on e5 is very weak. So this is very, very hard to play. Computer still says after e4 takes knight f6, queen f3, knight d5, black is only marginally worse. Again, people forget that when you're in the moment and you go from having a position like here where you could have gone b4 and just been clearly better to suddenly this moment where it's now equal at best, mentally it's very hard to reset. And there's only one player, I would say, out of all the top players who's able to do that, and that would be Magnus Carlsen, where he can be much better or much worse, but when that opportunity is there, so let's just say Magnus is much worse, and that opportunity is there to find the best moves, he will find those best moves. And conversely, if he's better, he's throwing away, he'll still find those best moves. And I don't think that any other top player that I've played against, really, I've seen them able to do that multiple times. I've seen Fabiano do it occasionally, but not consistently. And of course, for myself, I've obviously been very bad at that too. So bishop d6, rook takes e2, I take on c7 with my bishop, we get knight c5, and now I play d6 here. Now again, I was trying to keep it simple. I didn't really want to use too much time, get into time pressure, or have any real danger. Now I probably should have played rook f3, but after rook f3, rook takes a2, I saw bishop e5, knight d7, and I wasn't really sure why I should be much better here. I figure black is going to go a4, pawns are probably going to be exchanged, we'll probably get some endgame where it's going to be a draw. I might end up a pawn, let's just say as a sample line, something like this, for example, where we get some endgame like this, where I get 3 versus 2, but this would be a draw with correct play. So I played d6. Now I did see knight takes d3, but I thought during the game that if he does it, it looks very scary because I have d7, rook a8, rook d3, and now I'm threatening the queen. And if black tries to blockade, I can just trade, go knight e7 check, and then knight c6, and I'm going to collect the rook or get a queen here, so this would be winning. So black has to play rook takes a2. I make a queen, takes an a4. Now I did see this during the game, but I saw that after rook d7, let's say black plays a3. Apparently knight e7 is one way to draw. There's also something like bishop c7 with the idea of bishop e5, and I didn't really think that I could lose. Now apparently this doesn't work. Computer says after rook a1, king h2, rook e1, black is winning because I can't stop the pawn, but I was sure there was something here. Now probably the safest way is actually to play knight e7, king h7, and knight g6, because if black goes check, king h2 and a2, I have this very nice move bishop f6, threatening to create the what is this checkmate? I think this is called the sailboat or something, where you get the rook and the knight, and the king has no squares. I could be wrong on that. I forgot what it's called, but anyway, there's a very beautiful checkmate that exists. And after rook h1 here, I can go king g3, ignoring the rook. If I take, he queens with a check, and then after rook actually rook g8 allows knight f8, and there's still a draw here. But black can probably go rook to a7 here, and he's winning the game. So I don't take, I go king g3. He has to go rook g8, and now I can again go knight f8 check. If rook f8, I take, and we get a draw here. And if he goes king h8, I just keep yo-yoing with the knight between g6 and f8. So this would have been a draw. Now again, I did not want to use too much time, but I saw that I knew there had to be some way that I was at least drawing. So I thought if I'm at least drawing, then I should just play the move and keep going forward rather than thinking too long. Also because Duda was a little bit low on time, and he was very unhappy. At the board, he was visibly frustrated, so I figured if I play quickly, I give him less time to reset mentally. So after d6, he plays knight d7 very quickly, and this is really the fatal blunder. After this move, there's no coming back because now I have a very advanced passed pawn. I've got a great outposted knight here, and eventually I'm going to be able to use either the open c or the a file. So I play bishop takes a5, rook a2. Now I go bishop b4, just protecting the pawn. And really, it's very simple what I want here. If black ever moves the knight, I'm going to push the pawn through, and this is winning. Just one sample line would be like this to win the rook. So black can't really move the knight. My knight is outposted here, and black can't really do anything about this bishop. So all I'm going to do is very simply infiltrate on the c file here. That's the only thing that I really need to pay attention to. So after bishop b4, he goes bishop d8, which was a very logical and good move, actually, because it's the only way where after bishop b6, he guards the infiltration on c7, but he also puts pressure on the pawn on f2. Now, initially here, I was going to play rook c7, but luckily we had made time control, so I used a bit more time, and then I played king h2. Now, rook c7 was my initial idea, and I calculated rook f2, king h2, rook f7, and after rook b7, I thought I was much better here because, again, there's a lot of threats, like knight e7 is a big threat. Winning the knight on d7, just to illustrate the point. Let's say knight e7, pawn guards the knight, and you lose the knight on d7. And I thought I was doing very well. But as I started thinking more and more about this position after rook c7, I actually thought that black could maybe take and play knight b6. And once I saw this, computer still says this is winning, to be clear, but it gets very, very tricky because I do something like bishop c5, knight d7, and then something like knight e7 takes, and after rook a8, apparently rook d7 is winning, but it's very, very tricky. And as soon as I realized that black does not have to go for this rook f2 line, I started using my time, and after about, I want to say 8 or 9 minutes, I played the other order with king h2 here. And the point is that now if black captures after rook c7, you can no longer take the rook because your rook is on f2, not a2. So from f2, you can't go back to the back rank, whereas from a2, you could. So now the rook is just on the wrong square, and now you have to go rook f7, rook b7. And this is the same variation as before. And after bishop d8, I think rook takes d7, rook d7, knight e5 is just winning because after rook, let's just say b7, I go d7. Actually, sorry, not rook d7. Let's say rook a7, I go d7, rook f8, and now after takes here, I can go knight g6 check, king g8, and after rook f1, black is going to lose because I'm going to create an Arabian checkmate in the corner with the knight and the rook. So Duda here plays this move king h7 after a bit of a think, and after this there is no return because now I play the very slow move f3, just protecting the pawn on a light square, and black simply has no response to my infiltration, either with rook c7 sacrificing or doubling and going rook c8. So now he plays rook a7 to try and stop the sacrifice. I play rook to c6 here. We get bishop e3. I go bishop d2, just a very quiet move, offering the exchange of the bishops, because again, with this knight stuck on d7, this great outposted knight, I'm just going to go rook c2 and rook c8 or rook c7, and black will just lose here in the long term. Just one sample line, just stacking the two towers. Let's say knight f6 here, for example. I go rook a7, knight takes h5, and now after d7, let's just say rook g8, knight e5, I have knight c6, and it's game over. So he plays bishop d4. Now I go bishop c3 because, hey, as we've established, the two rooks and knight endgame is simply a technical win, not positional, sorry, technical win, and there's no danger. So he goes bishop e3, hoping for me to blunder knight e5, because then he would have bishop f4, winning the game. But now I just play rook c7, goes rook a8, and I very quietly play king h3 here, just ignoring everything and saying, hey, I'm going to eat your pawn on e5 next move, and there's really nothing you can do about it. So now Duda, out of desperation, plays b4. I take the pawn, plays rook b8, and now I just go back. Again, I'm just going to eat the pawn. Black really is nothing here. Even if black is the best possible setup, just to illustrate the point, let's just say something like this, for example, this is still horribly miserable for black. I've got the great wooden shield here supported by the pawn. Additionally, all the endgames are just lost because the pawns are fixed on dark squares as well. So even black's best possible setup is still completely lost. So he plays b4. Now I take on b4. We get rook b8. I go bishop c3 back, attacking the pawn. He plays rook b3. And now after a bit of a think, I play rook c8. And now it's game over. He has to play rook b8 because I'm threatening to checkmate him in the corner with the rook and the knight. And now I just take and I play d7 here. And it's very clean. Here Duda resigns because if he captures with the knight, I sack my rook. And after takes, I play knight f8, forking the king and the rook. And after king g8, knight takes d7. I simply have an extra minor piece on the board. And I will convert this very cleanly. So after this resignation by Duda, I now move into clear second place in the FIDE Grand Prix candidates with 1 round left. I will be playing in round 14 with the black pieces against Ding Liren. So it's going to be very exciting. As I've said before, I don't objectively think second place means a whole lot in terms of the world championship, etc., because I expect Magnus to play. That being said, I'm very happy with the win today, and we have one more game to go until I come back and I start streaming for you guys once again. So I hope you've enjoyed the recap. If you have not already subscribed, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back with one final recap tomorrow after the 14th round game against Ding Liren here in the FIDE Candidates.